Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Camille Tootie, former executive editor of NextGov, longtime storyteller and podcaster. I'm excited to welcome you to our conversation this afternoon, implementing the new age of app-centric government services. The digital revolution has improved how government leaders provide services, communicate internally, and interact with citizens and staff. As a result, there's a growing demand to provide digital services that are optimized, reliable, and agile. So how can agencies achieve meaningful observability of their applications to improve performance and user experience? We'll find out today. Here with me today are Defense Information Systems Agency's product owner for the account tracking and automation tool, Megan Sylvester, and Greg Ostrovsky, Executive Chief Technical Officer for AppDynamics, to explore the methods helping them drive improved performance observability and proactively identify and resolve performance problems and inefficiencies. Megan, just get us started. Could you briefly describe the work that you're doing at DISA?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Camille. I'm Lieutenant Commander Megan Sylvester. I've served in the Navy for over 2 decades, and I currently work for the Hosting and Compute Center, the HAC, at the Defense Information Systems Agency, as you mentioned, where I'm the product owner for the account tracking and automation tool, AT-AT, and also the DISA Acquisition Package Preparation System, DAPS. So AT-AT is a cloud provisioning tool that will enable initial provisioning of accounts for mission owners across multiple cloud vendors at all classification levels. And then DAPS, that's a tool that really streamlines the order to delivery process by automating repeatable processes and instituting automation that really reduces human error and to make the requirements gathering process more clear for the mission owners. We all know DoD acquisitions is not easy.
Greg, what about yourself? How is AppDynamics helping agencies achieve their modernization efforts? And briefly explain why performance observability is an important piece to keep in mind when modernizing legacy systems.
Sure. Well, Camille, thank you for having me on today. So first of all, let me just frame the problem a little bit real quick before I get into what AppD does. So if you look at the way the last several years have transpired, and you look at applications and you look at how applications have become so critical to the mission and performance, if you look at the end user side, the users, whether it's an internal employee or whether it's a citizen that's using the application, the expectations of a high performing, always available application have risen to levels we haven't seen yet. Now, where AppDynamics comes in, and when you kind of look at the overarching efforts, when you go down a path of transformation, you're adding new components to the application. You're adding new services. Maybe you're adopting cloud services. So you kind of look at it from the perspective, if you have your legacy technology there, you're not removing it and replacing it, you're actually adding to it. So it creates more of a sprawling type architecture. So what AppDynamics does, where AppDynamics comes to help, is for one, is enabling our agencies to be able to monitor from the lens of the end user, being able to see how their performance is, what their user experience looks like. But what we do at the core is we're an application observability tool that enables you to see all of the inner workings of the application. So again, when you look at it from the aspect of a very simple, elegant app that the user expects to always be working, the infrastructure is becoming more and more complex. AppDynamics helps our customers get through the noise of the application, be able to quickly pinpoint if it's an issue with a server, issue with a database, some of the network links are starting to slow down, but being able to quickly pinpoint, but also align the teams from all the different domains. You may have a networking team, you have a application development team, an infrastructure team, a security team. Typically what they do is they go in with a very domain specific approach. So when you have an issue that happens, everybody goes into a war room, you look at your own little tools, and it says that your area is fine, but ultimately the end user is suffering the impact. So what we do is we really help bring that together so that you can have that clear full stack view of how the application is performing. Now, above and beyond that, because missions are so dependent on applications to drive their outcomes, we also start to extrapolate what are some of the mission KPIs. That could be revenue, that could be the amount of IDs processed, anything that's going to be focused more towards the higher level mission And that way, when you look at that overarching approach where you have all these different domains working on the application, you also have the mission leaders that need to understand their investments are being put in the right place.
I'm curious to know some of the common challenges that agencies are having when integrating performance observability into their systems. Megan, could you start with that and maybe tell us about some of the hurdles you've encountered at DISA or some that you've seen your colleagues in government have to overcome?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think part of the problem is that organizations really lack the appropriate tools and resources to effectively integrate observability into their systems and get the right data to the right person at a high level. Specifically applying to the account tracking and automation tool, I'm going to take kind of a different approach to this question. But I've really noticed that observability of team performance in machine metrics doesn't really tell the entire story. So moving to agile processes and metrics has really helped my team overcome challenges by creating transparency and near real-time metrics. At the Hack, we use transparent processes and incentive fees. So when I see a situation where my team only satisfies, say, 20 out of 80 story points in a 2-week sprint, I can quickly convene the team to figure out what is going on. We can discuss the challenge and the hurdles and how to address them and then get everyone back on track. If we weren't using a transparent process, we wouldn't really have an accurate gauge of our progress, obstacles, or how we're satisfying customer expectations in product iterations.
Greg, what are you seeing in terms of these challenges with your government clients or just government agencies overall?
Yeah, so I really break it down into two real challenges, and it's really based on people, process, culture, and the other one is around technology. So what I commonly see is that agencies that are reluctant to change or reluctant to move with the way that the new modern innovations are happening are generally staying down the path of a siloed based approach. So that to me is a challenge to get the mindset change. I still run across a lot of folks that are under the mindset of, well, this is the way we do it and this is the way we're going to stay to do it. But ultimately, the challenge here is that the innovations happening from a technology perspective are superseding what their abilities are. So when you kind of look at it from a tooling approach, that's the second challenge, is around having the right tools, being able to gather the right insights. Because if you look at an application that may span across an on-prem server database, moving into the cloud where it might connect to a service that's running within the cloud, you kind of see how the complexity is growing. So from a tooling perspective, looking at it from an area where you can have a full stack view, that's the piece, that's the stepping stone of where you need to start from a observability approach. So thinking about it from changing the process, changing the way people think and way people act, so they don't go into the war room and just try to prove themselves innocent. They really go out there to try to fix the challenge that the end user is seeing. From the tooling side, ensuring you have the right ability to see that full transaction of the application, be able to see every step along the way that it takes. In this way, that everyone has a common tool set that shows the true path, right? The true dependencies that you have within your application, quickly isolating where the problem becomes. And really what that boils down to is it's, again, going after the most valuable currency we have, which is user experience. If the user is having an impact, it's kind of like when you flip a light switch in your house. You flip the light switch, you expect the light to be on. You don't really care that it may take several different hops to get to the power station. Same thing happens with the application. The end user just expects it to work. So when you kind of look at that as the overarching goal, with the two challenges being people, process, culture, the second one being tools, you bring those together, and that really helps alleviate some of these challenges in a fairly quick way.
And speaking of tools or particular techniques, are there any specific ones that government customers are, should be using that could help them proactively identify and resolve performance problems and inefficiencies?
Yeah, so some of the common tools that we've seen historically, and they still are relevant today, is you'll have, folks look at network monitoring, infrastructure monitoring, application monitoring, and then as you start migrating to the cloud, looking at cloud native monitoring. So there's several different tools that come into play. And that the area that we like to address within App Dynamics is, again, bringing that broader approach that showcases how all these components work together. So typically in a troubleshooting process, you might look at App Dynamics because we can quickly say it's a database that's causing the issue, where the database team would be able to take that data and then use maybe something that might be a little bit more in depth for their database monitoring. So when you kind of look at it from an observability approach, there's a couple things that are happening industry-wide. The quick adoption of Amazon cloud services, Azure cloud services, Google cloud services are starting to create an element of sprawl. So that's where the observability piece really comes into play, because you want to be able to have your view of what you ran from an on-premise perspective, but then include what you've had for addition of cloud services. So when you look at the tools available, you have independent siloed tools that are going to keep you to that level 1, level 2 state, being reactive to the calls coming in, or the help desk calls coming in. To get to level 3, level 4, that's where something like an App Dynamics would come in, because we have the ability of pulling everything together from a domain perspective, also being able to elevate that to how the mission KPIs are being able to operate. That's what helps us get our customers to a level 3, level 4 state, which means you're adding in a proactive response, not reactive anymore. You're being proactive, fixing things before the end user gets there, but also being able to build in the elements of automation. So like what Megan is working on, where she's helping customers automate their cloud adoption, leveraging the combination of automation within a observability platform allows you to do things where your infrastructure can be automatically right-sized based on the performance data coming through from an observability tool like App Dynamics. So when you look at that all kind of brought together, observability is not just monitoring, it's about looking at everything full scope, but also building out a roadmap where you can have automation or a self-healing type environment.
And to hop onto that, Greg, the warfighter has a stressful enough job as it is. So they really need to be able to focus on the mission and not broken IT. So it's our job here at DISA as a combat support agency to support combat operations. And at the Hack, this means ensuring that our cloud products support the mission and not detract from it. So our customers should never have to divert their time to focus from the mission to software.
Yeah, and to just kind of go back on that, when you look at observability, when you're investing in technology to drive the mission, you need to ensure your investments are being spent appropriately.
Absolutely.
And what I mean by that is when I'm talking earlier about being able to extrapolate the mission KPIs. This way the mission leads get to see, okay, we invested $10 million. We're getting a positive response from it. We're getting the KPIs met that we're looking for. So you kind of look at what we both do. You work on automation, I work on observability. They both go hand in hand to be able to get to that higher level of performance that you're looking for.
Exactly.
How do you envision emerging technologies impacting observability? Let's start with Megan.
Yeah, so obviously with emerging technology comes an increasing amount of data, and there are questions as to whether those existing tools can use the amount of data effectively. So ADAT specifically is building a dashboard to consume metrics to provide to the larger DoD. We're still asking those questions of like, what types of metrics does the enterprise need to know? More data isn't necessarily better. Sometimes it's just more. We really need to provide the right metrics so our customers and policymakers can effectively use the data to make business and resource decisions, and good ones. We will continue to ask our customers, how do we make massive amounts of data useful to you? And, we'll get better at each iteration. And as we figure out what tools will need to be designed to make the data consumable.
Greg.
So to Megan's point, more data means more complexity. And one thing that doesn't happen is you don't get more people. So that's the challenge we're in, right? Because as you're looking at a sprawling architecture, again, to be able to properly observe that, you means you're consuming a large amount of data. So having a powerful AI engine or ML engine that can then take the correlation of that data, that helps you quickly pinpoint where the problem is, but it also enables you to see what all the dependencies are. So when you look at some of the challenges or the areas that you need to focus on, starting off, you can't transform unless you know where all the moving pieces are. So that's one of the components that I think is an overarching challenge that we see industry wide, is that you got to see what you have and see where all the components are. Now, looking longer term to emerging technology, this is one of those things that is it's very difficult to pinpoint, for one, because so much happens at a rapid pace within the startup community and adding new components and acquisitions and what have you. But the one part that is starting to emerge is some open standards around observability. So namely, I'm going to refer to a component called open telemetry. So open telemetry has been a standard or de facto standard that's been emerging in the newer cloud technology space. And what that does is enables you to start to leverage more of a standard approach versus something that is specific to a vendor. So with that happening, it actually makes it easier longer term, because now the ecosystem is adopting an open standard. So as new technologies come on over the next 2 to 5 or 10 years, as long as they're open, as long as they're adopting that standardized approach, products like ours and others can be able to ingest that data correlated amongst all the other data that you bring through. So like Megan's point, volumes of data coming in, it's not getting any better. It's going to continue to grow, but as standards start to emerge, it makes adoption of newer technologies much easier when you want to include observability into the foray.
Megan, I want to follow up on what you said about when you're assessing tools. Like how do you assess tools? How do you evaluate, this is the best tool for our needs, especially when it comes to emerging technologies?
I actually leave that to the experts. We have a whole slew of teams that, look at what tools are appropriate and are at the right security level for the right classification. So, I look to the DoD, leaders in that specific profession to get me the tools that I need.
You got plenty of help.
I do.
And expertise, yeah. What are some of the first steps our audience should consider when embarking on their own observability journey? Greg?
Sure. So when you look at starting observability, first of all, if it's not in your plans yet, it really should be. Observability is what gets you the ability of fixing things on a proactive level, but it also helps you understand all the dependencies you have. So from a first steps approach, if you're just starting out, just a new to observability, the first thing, and let me just first say, observability and transformation generally go hand in hand, right? If you're transforming, you want to observe. So the first steps that I recommend to every customer is that you need to have an always up-to-date topology of your application. Of building apps was always an app tier node model. You had a fixed server, you had fixed infrastructure, your application ran, and away you went. Actually, as a matter of fact, when I built my first application almost 30 years ago, I don't even think I cared if people used it, because you had a captive audience back then. You built an application that was for a specific purpose. Now it's about, building high performing, great applications that people flock to. So when you kind of look at the first steps approach, the first thing you need that always up-to-date topology map of the app. Whether it's running on-prem or within the cloud, doesn't matter. You have to be able to see all the different pieces of dependencies. Without having that, you really can't move up the maturity model to go from a reactive state to proactive. Because what happens if you're moving to a newer modernized application development approach, that's where you're starting to build much faster iterations. You're leveraging a microservice architecture where you're now taking a single app and splitting up to maybe 15 or 20 different microservices, but your methodology is changing. So when you look at the efforts of going through that digital transformation perspective, starting out with understanding what all of your dependencies are is critical. The second step is understanding what your current performance looks like. So setting up a baseline. Do you get, what's the user experience look like? What's the performance look like? what's the mission KPIs look like? Now, as you move down that path of transforming, that's where you get the baseline to be able to set what are your improvements adding to the benefits of the mission. So that's when you look at it from a steps approach is one, get it on your roadmap if it's not there. Number two, make sure you can get yourself a fully automated, up-to-date topology map, set a baseline so you know you will perform today. And this way, when you do your transformation efforts, you'll be able to compare it to what you've had in the past. And that way it really helps you get into a position where, like I said, going up that stack, going up the maturity curve from level 1, level 2, where you're being responsive to tickets being called in or social media complaints or what have you, to a fully proactive state, but also with the mindset of adding in automation to your plans.
So I'll tweak that question for Megan. Greg talked about the overall first steps agencies should take when embarking on this journey. How did what does this journey look like? How has it, evolved?
So I cannot speak for the agency itself. I can speak from a product owner perspective, and bring it down to that stakeholder level. Because from a product owner perspective, the key step is really continuous stakeholder and customer engagement in every step of the process. At the DoD, our customers operate in a unique environment, and we have unique requirements for cloud. So the key to our success is really ensuring the products that we design actually do what our customers need them to do. The only way to be successful is by listening to our customers throughout the entire product lifecycle. And it's also important to note that user experience is key. Like Greg had mentioned in a couple of his answers, the user interface has to be designed and tested in collaboration with customers. No one likes to use products that are hard to use, especially when you're deployed. We really have to create a delightful user interface and experience for the warfighter.
The funny thing about that is, back when I first developed an application, you had to create a manual on how to use it. You can no longer do that. They have to be very intuitive, easy to pick up.
No, and I was just going to say, I'm obviously a Navy officer, and I spent a lot of time on ships, and there are still a lot of manuals on ships. But I spent a lot of time troubleshooting their networks and software. The Army and Marines like to talk about connectivity issues, overseas. But I can tell you how hard it is to work, on a ship out in the middle of the ocean. Commercial ships still struggle to offer connectivity to their passengers, but the Navy has to remain connected, period. When Hack is designing software, we're constantly thinking about what our customers are trying to accomplish, and of course, what conditions they'll use the software in, and how we can make that interface easy to use.
You mentioned it has to be a delightful experience. Can you elaborate on that?
So a delightful user experience, the Hosting and Compute Center actually uses that phrase a lot. It should be inviting. It should be easy to use, intuitive. You really shouldn't have to ask any questions or use that manual that Greg had brought up. It really should be a fun experience.
I love it. That's a great way to explain a user experience. So agencies have a great responsibility to meet customer needs and also manage rapidly evolving technologies and practices, which dramatically change user expectations. So what challenges are you and your customers facing around the user reliability and efficiency of your digital services? How are you improving them? And what is at stake if these challenges aren't addressed? Megan?
So the first thing that comes to mind is that our acquisition process is not designed for IT. Building a ship isn't the same as developing software, and in many cases, IT evolves at a faster pace than the acquisition process. And this creates a real challenge for our customers. Another challenge that we face is what Lieutenant General Skinner calls harmonizing cybersecurity and the user experience. This is one of DISA's line of efforts in the strategic plan and a driving force in our daily work. We all recognize the importance of cybersecurity in our work, and we are the Department of Defense after all. However, security must be balanced with the ability to execute the mission. Our DoD customers must have IT that enables their work. It should never be so secure that it isn't usable. So we're really working to improve the user experience.
Greg?
Yeah, like I said before, I mean, user experience is probably the most valuable component of the overarching application space. One of the other challenges that I hear commonly is that there's an upskilling effort that needs to happen. So, and just to kind of bring that back into perspective, like I was saying before, the application development process has changed. We moved to an agile DevOps world that we live in. And what that means is that the overarching way that you develop is changing. Now, as agencies are adopting more and more cloud services, the other part that I start to detect is that new skills are being either hired or trained. So you'll have a cloud ops team that looks at the overarching health of your cloud deployment, infrastructure teams that look at the infrastructure within the cloud. Your development strategies have changed to go from building monolithic applications to microservice driven applications that quickly iterate and roll out new components. So you kind of bring a lot of this into the overarching fold to make sure you hit that milestone that you want to target the end user experience. There's an upskilling effort that needs to occur as well, if it hasn't already. And that way you can start to have teams that are focused on newer nascent technologies. And again, of course, observability is a key part of that, because as you're starting to change or make a lot of rapid adjustments to an application, or start to adopt additional cloud services, ensuring you have that observability into the mix at a very early stage, ideally during the CI/CD cycle. This way that you're now always looking at performance and always looking at dependencies and how things are working together as you start to transform and you start to adopt a newer strategy or a new strategic approach. Now, again, end user experience is so critical here, and it's done in a way where you build an app and you want rapid adoption. There's no way of slowly rolling out. You roll it out, you get viral effect, or you get folks that want to pick it up. So now what I mean by that is that when you see that adoption rate go up, that is your most critical time to observe that application, because it's the first time the app gets rolled out, or the new updates get rolled out. If it starts to fail or break, your adoption rate goes down, you affect the mission in a negative manner, and it's very difficult to climb back out of that. So having observability from the get-go, as you're making all these dramatic changes or all these transformative changes, you got to have that into the mix, so that in real time what the performance look like and what the overarching impact is.
Greg, as it relates to security, what role does it play in all of this?
Yeah, so when you look at user experience and security, you're starting to see a bit of a blended approach where, if you have a security impact, I mean, obviously it can be very detrimental to the agency as someone infiltrates the network. But when you look at it from an end user perspective, security and observability are becoming very, very blended, starting to showcase that, if you have a security threat, if you have a breach in security, it diminishes the user experience, probably more so than a performance issue. So when you look at bringing into the overarching fold, you look at the way things are changing, a lot of folks are building in a DevOps model or a DevSecOps model, where you're putting security at the table when it comes down to the design and implementation of security within the application. So not only are security professionals able to be relevant in the beginning of the design of the application, but they also can bring in new innovations, new ways of authentication, new ways of security be built into an application. Because the one thing users don't want is they don't want a security implementation to be overburdening on how they use the application. So what we've done at Cisco App Dynamics, we collaborated with our security team. We actually built a product called Cisco Secure Application. So what we do is we monitor for threats and vulnerabilities within the application, but also enable you to automatically respond. So a great example was the recent issue with Log4j, where Log4j was a library that the hackers were able to create an exploit where if the log4j library was called, it actually would make an outbound call and enable the hackers to get into the organization. So what we've done is we were able to discover where log4j is in the application for a lot of our customers, both in the public and private sector, where we detect that library within the app. We can then inject an HTTP header to block that library from being invoked, keeping the mission alive, keeping the application alive, but remediating the issue so that the threat doesn't become a bigger challenge. Now that's something that's built right into the core platform of AppDynamics within our observability tool, so you can just easily adopt a security approach that brings in that app first mentality, fully integratable with other security solutions so that the security team may want to have a centralized view. But like I said, baked right into our solution.
Megan, upskilling and reskilling, I'm sure, is front and center for you. So how do you approach that?
It's a great question, Camille. So from a hosting and compute center perspective, Ms. Sharon Woods, the director, has started a Technician of the Future initiative that seeks to change the way we look at the hosting and compute skill set. Historically, technicians specialized in a discipline and only worked in an area associated with that discipline, such as database or servers. And that specialized approach worked when technology was siloed, but today, technology is really fluid and touches multiple disciplines. For example, private cloud interacts with public cloud and data centers. Similarly, technicians need to operate across technologies and across disciplines in order to serve our mission partners effectively. So technicians really need to be comfortable operating across multiple technology domains. And we're starting with several disciplines, including cloud architecture, mainframe, scripting, VMware, automation software, machine learning, AI, just to name a few.
And on a parting note, we have talked about the steps that agencies should take when they embark on this journey, but what advice do you have for other government agencies or leaders in them looking to modernize their systems and improve performance? Any important milestones they should be considering 6 months or 12 months down the road? Megan?
Yeah, I have many, but I'd say be agile, fail quickly, and continuously innovate. Like the private sector, DoD has to be willing to throw away something if the customer requirements change. And that's hard to do sometimes. By maintaining a continuous user feedback loop with our customers, we can pivot quickly when the requirements change and minimize the cost of failure. And lastly, innovation isn't possible without failure.
Greg?
So from a parting thought and where folks should be looking for the future. One is, if you look at observability, you look at the overarching tools that you have within your portfolio, look at the innovations that are happening in the industry as well. So we've changed from traditional based applications to a DevOps strategy. A lot of things happen at a very, very rapid pace. So making it personal, always keep yourself abreast of what's happening, look at emerging technologies, take ownership for your own career to make sure that you can upskill yourself, make yourself relevant, go where the technology is going. But that also makes an element where, when you work for an organization that allows you to start to push your limits, start to experiment, you got to watch out for failures. But the thing is, don't be afraid of failures. When you have a failure, you got to have observability on top of it so that you can quickly course correct if there's an issue. You see an application usage going up and all of a sudden it deviates back down. You want to be able to quickly course correct so that you can make sure that you're meeting. And then the last piece is when you look at building out your longer term strategy and roadmaps, this is one of the most common conversations I have with agencies is about how do I mature my operational model? How do I go from being reactive to help desk calls or issues coming in from the end user side to a reactive state where I'm now fixing things before it becomes an issue, all the way down the path of building an automation. Because one thing that's clear is that technology is going to continue to advance. You're going to see new capabilities brought in. Building an automation is a long-term strategy that is going to help you reduce the amount of firefighting that your team's doing and allow them to innovate. So get into a position where you can build out a strategy and a roadmap and ensure that you go that step from level one, being very, very reactive, moving up to step two, where you start to become more aligned with the mission. Step three is about being proactive, and step four is about automation.
Great parting words from the two of you. Megan, Greg, I want to thank you for being with me this afternoon. If you missed any segment from today's event, you'll get an email later this week with the on-demand video. I hope you share those conversations with your colleagues to continue the dialogue around some of the government's most complicated issues. I'm Camille Tootie. See you next time.